Let's now bring the conversation back here to Ottawa, but not in studio, over down the road. David Coletto standing by, the founder and the CEO of Abacus Data. David, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Great to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So listen, very great that you're here because you did just release new polling numbers yesterday in regards to public attitudes regarding the NDP, and of course very timely given the convention that's taking place in Winnipeg right now. And in the report that you issued in your Substack, you basically say that the NDP has an identity problem. What do you mean by that?
Well, it really has no identity at all for many Canadians. When you ask them, do you have a positive or negative view of the party? Most people are either in neutral or I don't know. When you ask them to describe, which words best describe the NDP, there's no one that really stands out. And perhaps most noteworthy is when you ask Canadians, what role should the NDP play in Canadian politics? The answers are all disparate and spread out, meaning there's no real, even among New Democrat inclined Canadians, those who might be open to voting NDP aren't quite sure what role it should play. And so I think it finds itself after more than almost a year since its worst election showing. It's struggled to, be part of the conversation without a permanent leader. I think this convention and the selection that members make is maybe in part to figure out what it is the NDP stands for, because Canadians, generally speaking, even New Democrats, aren't really that sure.
Yeah, and so much so that when I was going through your report, you point out that the number of accessible voters for the NDP is now reduced, not what it once was. What exactly did you find?
Yeah, so today, just over 1 in 3 Canadians, 34%, say they would be open to voting NDP. Now, that's not nothing. That's millions of people. But if you go back to 2015 or the years just after that, we were typically getting 50 or close to 50% of Canadians being open to voting NDP. It wasn't long ago, even prior to the 2021 federal election, you had over 43 or 44%. So they've seen a significant drop over the last number of years in people even being willing to consider them. And that's a real problem, because it means in order to get more votes, you've got to convince a fewer and fewer people who are even open to voting NDP. And it also means that people aren't listening. If they aren't willing to vote for you, if they aren't open to voting for you, they may not even listen to when they see your leader on TV or in the news, or if they come into your community. So I think job one for the New Democrats is to open more minds back up to considering the New Democrats, because if they're going to be a very small niche party, they're going to struggle to win more than a dozen seats, which is what they need to be an official party in the House of Commons.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, also problematic for the party is another top line number that you found that said that nearly half of Canadians don't believe the party has any more relevance. What's leading voters to that conclusion? How difficult is that for a party to contend with?
Well, it's certainly difficult. I mean, half say it's relevant, so there's still, again, an audience, but you want more. Even if somebody's not going to vote for you, you want them to believe you've got a role to play. And I think I chalk it up to two things. One is a lack of a permanent leader over the last year has meant, the NDP, and lacking party status in the House of Commons means they're not getting as much coverage. They're not getting to have a voice in the debates. But that debate we're having itself hasn't lended itself to a third party, right? Even since Justin Trudeau stepped away and Donald Trump was elected and took office in early 2025, much of the conversation, Michael, you reported, has been really about how does Canada deal with Donald Trump? How does Canada deal with the uncertainty? And so voters are have really become divided over two binary choices. I mean, in the 2025 election, the Liberals and the Conservatives got more votes combined than we have seen those two parties get in a very, very long time. And so that binary choice, which in the last election was between who do you want to deal with Trump, which Mark Carney overwhelmingly won, versus who do you think will best deliver change, Pierre Poilievre won that. The New Democrats were not seen at all in either of those. And that, I think, continues to today because of the dominance of external issues in our politics, means the New Democrats haven't been able to offer up an alternative to either of those two parties. And as a result, you've got more than half of Canadians saying the party's not relevant right now.
Although arguably there is some space because, in 2025, even though Canadians got to know Mark Carney a bit better through that electoral process, no one knew how he was exactly going to govern. We now know that a Carney government governs more center-right than his predecessor. That would seem to open up a space for the NDP. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, and I think there is. When we ask Canadians what issues should the New Democrat Party, with its new leader, focus on, it's housing, it's affordability, it's public health care, it's being a defender of public health care, and dealing with corporate concentration and power. And so these are all areas where the NDP historically has sort of leaned in and been the voice challenging the status quo, challenging those two main parties. So I do think there's a space for them. And I do, to your point, particularly given that, by all accounts, Mark Carney has focused on issues that Justin Trudeau has not focused on, much more economically focused. Now, that's where most people want him to be. So the challenge also, though, if you're going to become relevant in the conversation, you've got to offer up an alternative theory, right? So if people are feeling uncertain about the future, if reassurance is really what they're seeking, I think if it's Avi Lewis, if it's Heather McPherson, if it's Rob Ashton, they've got to answer that question about why, one, Mark Carney's approach isn't working, and two, why a completely different approach led by the New Democrats would make people feel more reassured, would protect, their standard of living, their quality of life, which is what I would say most Canadians are worried about at this moment.
Most worried about at this moment, as you say. So what would then be job number one, do you think, for any new leader of this party? We'll know tomorrow who will become the next NDP leader. What do you think job number one is then for them?
That's a tough question, because if you walk into this job, I think you look around and you say there's a lot of rebuilding to do. They've got to find a way to raise more money. Without money, they're not going to be able to compete. They've got to build some infrastructure. Those are the less exciting, less interesting things. But I think most important is this is a moment right now where more attention is being paid to the NDP than I think has been in probably 2 years. And so whoever wins tomorrow and comes out of this weekend, I think it's how do you build on that momentum? How do you keep, someone like yourself, Michael, asking the question like, okay, well, what's the New Democrat perspective here? How do we make sure we bring that into the conversation? And then with some momentum, you may get, you've got by-elections coming up. It's going to be tough for the New Democrats in all those seats, but can you start to signal that you're coming back, right? And I think it's important to remember, as someone who loves political history, that the NDP has been in this moment before. After the 93 election, they lost party status. They only had 9 seats, 6% of the vote, not dissimilar to what they saw in 2025. 4 years later, they got back into the House. They made a major breakthrough in Atlantic Canada with Alexa McDonough. And so it's possible to come back. And so anyone who's writing them off, I think it's probably very much premature, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be difficult. So job one, ride whatever momentum you get coming out of this convention and make sure your first introduction to Canadians, which, Angus Reid's poll showed, most Canadians had not heard of any of the candidates running. Your first impression will be what they hear from you, likely tomorrow evening on the news or in the next few days after it.
Okay. David, always appreciate the time and the insight. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael. Take care.
You too. David Coletto of Abacus Data.